Welcome to Photoshop, and in this case, Adobe Camera Raw. And today we're going to go over the texture, the clarity, and sharpening sliders. What's the difference between the three and when you should use them? So I have this problem a lot. Non-professionals, they open up their image and instantly they want to use the power of Adobe Camera Raw or Photoshop to make their image look better. And they grab the clarity and they slide it over and it gives it this amazing contrast and sharpness and makes it pop. And they're like, wow, that is cool. And then they go on either into Photoshop or continue toning in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. That is when you should not use clarity. Clarity, texture, and sharpening are the last steps in the process. Let's go over this again. Last steps in the process. So why? By adjusting this clarity, all you're really doing is increasing the contrast in your photo. When you're toning, you want to start a tone flat in the beginning. You want to get the most out of your photo. And then you can increase the contrast because basically you're throwing away valuable shadow detail information if you increase your contrast or sharpness too much in the beginning. So what we want to do is do this in the end. So we would take an image like this and we're in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to actually flatten it out and make it look less attractive, right? What we're trying to do is get all our values, our tonal scale where we want it. Then we're going to send this over into Adobe Photoshop and we are going to tone our image. Then we are going to add that contrast. However, when you're doing this, it is helpful to size your image first because depending on what size your eventual output is will make a difference on how your image looks. So in this case, I don't want that thing right there. Let's say I decide to crop this a little bit. And I'm not going to go in here and tone this. This is a toning video. This exposure is pretty close to good enough so we can deal with this. All right, so we've got this image. Now let's say I want to size this. We're going to come into here to image size, and I'm going to make this 2000 pixels. We're going to size it at 2000 pixels. I'll enlarge this so you can see it, and I will grab my layers palette and plop it over here so we can all see that. Now, we have this image. The first thing that we want to do is I'm just going to duplicate this to make it easier, is turn this into a smart object. So I'm going to right click or control click to turn this into a smart object. And so we can see convert to a smart object. And bam, just like that, we're going to convert this into a smart object. Now, what that's going to do is a smart object is going to allow this to be non-destructive, meaning after we apply these filters, we can turn them on and off. If we did not do this, they would not be non-destructive. So we're going to create that smart object. Now, you're actually going to go backwards in time. We're going to go back up into Adobe Camera Raw, because there isn't a texture slider in Adobe Photoshop, but you can always go back into Adobe Camera Raw. And down here we have the texture and clarity sliders. What we're going to do is we're going to actually zoom in so you can kind of see what's going on here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit to that. And we're going to come down and we're going to grab this texture slider and we're going to slide this over. The first thing you'll know is between the texture and the clarity slider, if you slide them both over at 100%, you're going to get less of an effect with the texture slider. The texture slider is looking for frequencies. So it's looking for the frequencies. The frequencies are the detail in the image. And it's increasing the contrast on those frequencies. All sharpening, texture, and clarity does is increase your contrast. So it makes one side whiter and one side darker. There's no enhancing actual detail. What it's doing is increasing your contrast. Therefore, if you have a lens with a lot of contrast, an expensive lens, your lens is always going to look sharper. It's not that it's actually sharper, it's just that it has more contrast. So what this is doing is it's increasing the contrast in the areas that have frequency. And so that is basically, in layman's term, areas with details. Clarity, on the other hand, increases contrast in the midtones. So we have on the detail in the midtones. I actually prefer if I actually used sharpening texture. The problem with this stuff is it's a global adjustment. So at this point, it's a global adjustment. That meaning we're going to be increasing the texture in the sky in other areas. So if there's detail in the sky, like a cloud that has a little bit of detail, or someone's face, a skin tone, if it has a little bit of detail, it's actually going to increase your contrast, and you don't want that. Now, this can be good for landscapes and stuff like that, and it definitely is worth using or trying out. But what you have to remember, what I'm trying to stress here, these are global adjustments at this point. If you want them to be very specific, you need to use them so they are not global. And what you can do is go over into the brush, and you'll notice you have the texture, the clarity, sliders, as well as sharpness. In this case, I can take my texture and slide it all the way over, and then I can just apply it by brushing it in to a specific area. In this case, I've applied it to this dome, but not the sky, not the trees, not anywhere else but right here in the dome. And that would go the same with the clarity and the sharpness. Now, one cool thing that you can use with sharpness, and I'm going to kind of go back out of this brush, so we are going to just hit reset to reset that, and we're going to go back out of this. So right here is your sharpening. I'm just going to jam this over, and you can see just like that, it increased the sharpness in the whole image. Now, however, since this is global, it's affecting the whole area, but you do have the ability to mask. And if you've ever used unsharp mask, you will see thresholds. Thresholds in this masking are virtually the same thing, just different wording, but they're essentially doing the same things. We don't want to sharpen everything. We just want to sharpen the areas that have edges and high contrast, because that's what's going to give us the detail. So up here where things are subtle, we don't want to sharpen that. We just want to sharpen things where there's a dark edge and a highlight edge. That's what's going to give us that pop. So what I'm going to do is hold the Alt Option key, and I'm going to slide the mask. And you're getting this sort of luminance mask here. But what it's doing is, remember, black is hiding, white is showing or revealing. So anywhere that there's black, it's not getting sharpened. Anywhere that there's white, it is getting sharpened. So what I can do is just keep sliding this over until I get a mask that makes me happy. I can say that's okay. And now I've sharpened this image, but I've only sharpened those edges of the image. And that's going to allow me not to get noise inside of my image. So what we'll do is we'll just come in here, and we're going to go back to the texture slider. And just for fun, we're going to add a little texture and add a little clarity. And I'm going to go ahead and say okay. We're going to send this over. And so right here, you can see we have a smart filter. So this is a camera raw filter, smart filter, and I've sharpened this image. If I don't like what I've done, I can just turn it off, and then I can turn it on. So this is where the non-destructive part of this image comes in. So I'm going to take this image and I'm going to duplicate that again. And this time I'm going to come and turn this layer off, and I'm going to leave this layer on. I'm going to create this one into a smart object again. Make this into a smart object. And then we're going to come up here back to camera raw filter. And the second way to do this, and I think the more intelligent way to do this, is because you have so much more control, is to do all your sharpening and all that stuff inside of the adjustment brush. So we will come up here, and I will get this all back to defaults. So I've set everything to a default, and then I'm going to come down here and add a little texture because I just want to sharpen more of my image, and we're just going to do a little sharpness at the same time. Now that's great. At this point, nothing has actually been sharpened. Then I can come in with my adjustment brush, and I can paint those areas in where I might want the detail. Let's say I don't want to enhance the trees, I just want to enhance the building. I'll make this brush smaller so I can kind of get up in here, and maybe I'll get this little thing here. But basically I've kind of gone through and made those adjustments. What's great is, don't forget, if you want to add more, you can always add more, or you can add less. This is a non-destructive slider, so we're looking at this, and if I want to add a little bit of clarity, I can add a little bit of clarity. Anything that I would want to do, I can slide those sliders, and we're going to see the effect as we go. Now let's just assume this is how I wanted it. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And so what we're going to do here is turn this off and then turn this one back on. In this case, because I used basically some adjustments that were global, it sharpened the whole image. In this case, I was able to isolate my sharpening to very specific areas. There's no right or wrong way. It really just depends on what you want to do. So that's a little bit on how to use the camera raw adjustment sliders to increase contrast in your image to give apparent sharpness by using them non-destructively, by creating an image into a smart object. Hopefully that's been helpful. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.